the speakers, we are now open for questions. Please, if you can raise your hand, and then you will get a mic, and if you can, please tell your institution and your affiliation, and your question to who is ready. So we are open to questions.
Thanks very much. I'm Johnny Gordon. I'm independent rather than with the institutional affiliation. Well, I thought the results were extremely interesting, but what particularly grabbed my attention were the results for India. And unfortunately, I see India was not one of the more detailed national modelling studies. But given the significance of India, just in terms of numbers and therefore poverty impact, but also India's very significant activism on the Doha front, including implications for trade liberalisation. I'd be very interested to hear any thoughts. I know, Kim, you said more work obviously needs to be done on India, but is there anything intuitive that comes from looking at least the broad brush data that you could elaborate on?
Thank you. Any other questions?
Sam Moore from IFPRI. Sam Moore from IFPRI. I noticed that all of the results were in terms of poverty lines, changes in population below the poverty line. Did you do any analysis at all with poverty gaps, where you have a little sensitivity then to the distribution of the population below the poverty line or right next to the poverty line?
Yes, please. Wait a second, please.
Oh,
thank
you. Would you suggest to the World Fund at least how the Chinese and the Indian ones as far as
Thank you. Any other question? Yes, there is a question.
Hi, Charlotte Tevebrand from IBC. I have a couple of sort of more general questions about how the overall conclusions here mesh with earlier conclusions I seem to recall from both the World Bank and IFPRI. And the first question pertains to the finding that a domestic liberalization seems to have a greater impact for most countries. These studies actually show that world liberalization has a greater impact on poverty reduction than domestic. And it seems to me the World Bank in the past has said the opposite, if I don't remember correctly. And then for IFPRI, since trade liberalization does lead to higher prices, how do you square this with your work on the danger of high food prices is a question. And I forgot my third one.
Okay, thank you. So we go to the panel and then we go back to more questions. Please, Kim, you want to start?
Is this working? Yes. Good. Well, starting at the top then, Joanna's question about India. India is close to self-sufficient. It may be on the free markets, slightly importing, slightly exporting. So it's on the edge in terms of trade effects of rest of world liberalisation on itself. If it was a net importer, it would be worse off if world prices were to rise for food products, and it's a net importer. On the domestic front, though, the farmers in India get net subsidies, particularly on the input side. So if they were to be liberalised, they lose out from that as well. And that may be more than what they might gain from global liberalisation. So if most of the poor are in the rural areas of India, and they're losing out from an elimination of their own subsidies, and they're not gaining enough from a rise in the world prices, then that's one reason why they could be worse off, for example. There may be more to it than that, and the GTAP results with India are always a bit unusual, and it might be something in the distortion structure outside of agriculture that is causing that, and we haven't played around with that yet.
And labour market, perhaps, I don't know.
Yes, we didn't have any special institutional arrangements in the model for the labour market, yes, unlike China, for example. Sam, your question about things other than just the $1 a day poverty line, we did look at least at the $2 poverty line as well, and the results do differ for some countries depending on that. It depends if if a large number of the poor fall between the $1 and $2 range, you get an opposite sign to the effect on poverty. So that was the extent to which we did play with that a little bit. But the distributional part of it, we only gave you results on the Gini coefficient, but you could look at everywhere along the distribution field and go down on this. Charlotte, you were asking about whether the rest of the world or agriculture was more important for any particular country. It varies by country. That's the message that comes out of this. And that's the frustrating thing usually in trying to bring these sorts of results together, is that you don't get a uniform set of results that make it easy to give a big punchline. And certainly the work on Doha came out like that. If you remember the work of Alan Winters and Tom Hotell's talk in 2006, that was very frustrating for World Bank management because they couldn't come out with a strong number saying Doha will be great for poverty reduction, because it really did vary a lot depending on the country. What I think is striking about the results in this particular book is how important agriculture is to a positive outcome in terms of poverty alleviation and also inequality reduction, and how uniform it is across countries. There's only a small number of exceptions in this particular sample. It's probably because in this example, in this study, we're looking at full liberalisation, whereas in Doha, you've got partial liberalisation and developing countries are not participating, and these developing countries are not participating at all in the sorts of scenarios. So the gains that could come from own country reform just are not going to be present in those types of studies as compared with this. Again, it's a good reminder of the importance of participating if you want to benefit from trade reform. And Charlotte also raised the question, if rising prices internationally from world liberalisation of agricultural markets is a good thing for poverty, which is what our study is suggesting by and large. Why is it that institutions like IFPRI and the World Bank and FAO are saying that the high prices that we've had are going to add to poverty, the high prices we had in 2008, so it looks like the opposite sort of story. And the reason for the difference is, I think, the focus of the institutions is on people who are being hurt by an event. In the case of the 2008 food price spike, net buyers of food are being hurt by that spike. That's quite a different result from trade liberalisation, but the point is that there are poor people on both sides of this market, whether they're net buyers or net sellers of food, is going to make an important impact on the expenditure side of household effects. That's only half the effects, though. The other half is what's happening on the factor market side, the earnings side of households. So there's a lot going on there. It is true that you can have poverty reduction from an increase in world prices or a decrease in world prices, but they won't be the same households.
Just to follow up on that specific one, Tom Patel and I looked at that issue of the high food prices versus liberalisation for a contribution to Danny Roderick's fall. I think one of the things in the 2007-8 price spike, we were really focused on the dramatic increases in the prices of staple foods. When Kim and I had looked at that, we found that the increases from full liberalisation, increases in prices of staple foods are fairly small. The really big increases in prices are from highly distorted products like dairy products. Now, dairy products are often produced by small farmers who are quite poor and can't even afford to consume much of it. They actually net sell it. So the poverty impacts there are often quite different. And with global liberalisation of agriculture here, we're talking not just staple foods, we're talking a much broader variety of products associated with that. The other thing is, when you have global liberalisation, world prices go up. But when you've got protection, as Kim pointed out, in developing countries, it may, on average, is actually very close, but I think from work I've done, it suggests that consumer prices are going down in developing countries when you have global liberalisation, including developing country liberalisation. So it's not appropriate to sort of say, well, world liberalisation raises world prices, and then to compare that with an increase in world prices that's coming from shocks to prices of staple foods. There's a very, very different simulation.
Sam, on your point, in the book, the various country studies do look at poverty gaps and so on, and those details are there. Yeah, those around Philippines in particular, Pakistan also, and I think some others. Well, everyone wants to take a shot at this issue of price increases and poverty, price decreases and poverty, so let me take a shot as well. It seems to me that, you know, it's a very complicated issue, but it seems to me three different scenarios need to be sort of kept conceptually separate. One is, you have a fixed technology and you remove some distortions in policy, which is the trade liberalization scenario. And that's going to have a certain set of effects given that fixed technology that you have. And farmers responding to it and prices changing, consumers being affected and so on. Then you have something like the price spike in 2008, where in the short run, no farmer benefits, you know, whoever has grain and storage benefits, but a lot of people, including even farmers, who don't have grain and storage, it takes at least a year for them to benefit from those high prices. So the immediate impact of that clearly is a crisis for the World Food Program, an increase in global poverty. It's just a different kind of situation to evaluate in terms of looking at it, and you need to keep them separate. And then the third one, Justin Lin started the seminar by saying if we improve agricultural productivity, that's really the key to lowering poverty in the world. But and I think we all of us on the panel would absolutely agree with that. But think what that does. Improving agricultural productivity is going to drive down world prices. Historically, for the last half century, world prices of food products falling has been a big boon to reducing poverty. Now, how can you square that with higher prices, reducing poverty? Well, how you square that is that the worst thing to be in a world of falling world prices is a stagnant peasant farmer who's not changing their technology. You are impoverished by those falling prices while the world is enriched. So there has to be, along with the agricultural technology change, there has to be that escape hatch. There has to be a possibility for people to move out of agriculture. So those resources can move out and earn higher incomes, and those resources that stay in agriculture can also earn the higher incomes. Every successful country in economic development has made that transformation, and the unsuccessful ones are the poor countries. So that's, again, a different scenario from liberalization with a static technology or a price spike that causes a crisis for the world food situation. I think what you see in the attention that the institutions focus on one or the other is somewhat the different emphasis that those different things call for. And they really have to be all thought about simultaneously, but not mushed into oatmeal, if you see what I'm saying. Thank you, David.
Maybe I can respond to the question about whether the World Bank is looking into the lesson that we can learn from China's and India's reform, and whether the World Bank has intention to encourage other developing countries to follow China's model. I think that is a very good question because, as you observe, China in the past 30 years has made the largest contribution to the poverty reduction of the world. And that possibility is because of the reform in agricultural sectors, include the productivities, include the incentive, as well as the reform in the overall economic sectors and promote economic growth. And China was able to carry out this reform because China was pragmatic in its approach. And so on the one hand, promote stability, but on the other hand, promote economic growth. And there must be some lesson that can be learned from the Chinese experiences, but certainly, we cannot transplant China's model to other countries. But the World Bank does encourage other developing countries to have a dialogue with China, and now we're promoting the South-South lending, and China, India, and other African countries, sitting together, and they can discuss the challenges they face and how the countries solve the challenges. And I think those kind of learning will be very valuable for other developing countries.
Thank you, Professor. So just to continue on this issue of increasing prices and the position of IFPRI, it's very clear that what IFPRI keeps saying is that the positive trend of prices is good for the farmers, and we agree on that because that will give a correct signal for the farmers and to increase productivity. What we are saying is a problem is the spikes and high volatility, extremely high volatility, which doesn't give correct signs and will have a direct effect on the consumers, and therefore increase levels of poverty. So I don't see any any disagreement in terms of both results. So let me continue for questions, please. Anyone? Yes.
I remembered my other question, but thanks first of all for the clarifications. I guess I made that point a little bit. I mean, I understand the answers, but I think we have to be careful in a public that may not be as well educated about some of the nuances. There is a danger, I think, especially now, to say, oh, so ag trade distortions are actually a good thing because they'll keep prices down. So I've heard that argument being made, and you know, maybe in particular with regard to cap reform and things like that, we need to be mindful, I think, about conveying that well to the public at large. My other question, I guess, is about the politics here. I mean, it's not a surprise that developing countries turn to trade measures to get revenues. And how realistic is it really for them to move from that type of revenue to taxation, in particular income taxation, which is administratively, of course, not an easy feat. I don't know if you could comment on that.
Any other questions? Okay, I have one question, and please excuse me because I'm not a monitor. So, but when I look into your poverty numbers, especially because it's extreme poverty, then I'm a little bit concerned in how you measure the transmission of these changes to this extreme poor. So for me, technically thinking, it's easier to look to the distribution, but to look to the extreme case, which I know, for example, in the case of China, China has to invest a lot of money to be able to target those guys which are in specific geographical areas, very, very concentrated and very difficult to identify. So how your models capture that isolation levels, how you're able to bring this distance to markets and to everything that this extreme poor have to be able to come up with those numbers. So that's a concern I had in terms of the model. So any other question about that? So please, open to the panel.
Boy, these are some great questions here. Charlotte, on the revenue replacement, there's quite a literature on that. Michael Keane has done a couple of studies from the fund. One that found that revenues weren't being replaced in some of the early liberalisation, and another that's more recently we've found that they have been replaced. Now, I think, I haven't looked at the details of that, but I fear a lot of that would actually be coming from direct taxation, value-added tax in particular, which raises some of the issues that David talked about in his study. I think one would want to look carefully for the increases in income tax rates, use of income tax, which is typically going to be much more policy friendly. On the price transmission issue, many of the models are using Armington elasticities, and so what you're going to get is a liberalisation is going to be directly helpful on the consumer side, because the consumption bundle includes imports. Its impact on lower end producer prices will tend to be less, because producer prices depend in these modelling parameters typically are linked more to export prices. So that indirect transmission is there in one way, in many but not all of these models. Some of the work done on China, the work done by Scott Rosell, Jikun Huang, and their co-authors, has actually had specific focus on transmission in there. But of course, China is actually a really interesting case because it appears that prices are transmitted incredibly well within China recently, since all of the reforms.